Good day, everyone. I am Charlene Hariol, and I am the first reporter of our topic, which is the lymphatic system. So, lymphatic system is our body's sewerage system. It maintains fluid levels in our body tissues by removing all fluids that leak out of our blood vessels. So, it is very important for the optimal functioning of our general and specific immune responses. Components of the lymphatic system: the lymph and the lymphatic vessels. So the lymph is a clear fluid that contains a high concentration of white blood cells and plays an important role in the immune response. Extracellular fluid from veins diffuses into lymphatic vessels and eventually into lymph nodes. And lymphatic vessels are the network of capillaries and the large network of tubes located throughout your body that transport lymph away from tissues. Lymphatic vessels collect and filter lymph as it continues to move toward larger vessels called collecting ducts. The functions of the immune of lymphatic system. So there are three functions. The first one is drains excess interstitial fluid. One of the major role of lymphatic system is to continually collect excess interstitial fluid and drain it away from the tissues. The second one is transports dietary lipids. Nearly all dietary lipid is transported in chylomicrons from the gut to the blood via the lymphatic system by entering specialized lymphatic vessels in the villi of the intestine known as lacteals. And the last one is carries out immune responses. So these specialized cells and parts of the immune system offer the body protection against diseases. This protection is called immunity. Humans have three types of immunity: the innate, adaptive, and the passive. Anatomy of lymphatic system. So, lymphatic system is composed of lymphocytes, lymphatic vessels, lymph nodes, tonsils, spleen, and thymus. So in this picture, you can see the lymph and lymphocytes. Because the lymph is present in your lymphatic vessels, it is fluid, and the lymphocytes are white blood cells, uniform in appearance but varied in function, and include T, B, and natural killer cells. So these cells are responsible for antibody production, direct cell-mediated killing of virus-infected and tumor cells, and regulation of the immune responses. So the circulatory system and lymphatic system interrelationship. So the relationship of circu and lymphatic. The lymphatic system works with the cardiovascular system to return body fluids to the blood. So together, the blood, heart, and blood vessel form the circulatory system, and the lymphatic system, the lymph nodes and lymph vessels supports the circulatory system by draining excess fluids and proteins from tissues back into the bloodstream, thereby preventing tissue swelling. Lymphatic capillaries. So lymphatic capillaries are found between cells and are in the tissues of every organs except in the vascular tissues, central nervous system, portions of the spleen, and bone marrow. When we say vascular tissues, it is a tissues without blood vessels. And the central nervous system is your brain and your spinal cord, and some of the portions of the spleen and also the bone marrow. So this is your lymphatic capillaries, and lymphatic capillaries collect lymph fluid from the tissues, which allows them to regulate the pressure of the interstitial fluid. So when pressure is greater in the interstitial fluid than in lymph, the cells separate slightly. And when the pressure is greater inside the lymphatic capillary, thus the lymph cannot escape back into interstitial fluid, and excess interstitial fluid accumulates, causes tissue swelling. So in this, the cells adhere more closely. So lacteals is a specialized lymphatic Capillaries in the small intestine carry dietary lipids and lymphatic vessels and ultimately into the blood. Lymph trunks and ducts. So there are five principal trunks: the lumbar trunk, intestinal trunk, bronchomediastinal trunk, and the subclavian trunk, and also the jugular trunk. So this lumbar trunk drains lymph from the lower limbs, the wall and viscera of the pelvis, the kidneys, the adrenal glands, and the abdominal wall. So these lumbar trunks are formed by the union of the efferent vessels from the lateral aortic lymph nodes. And the second one is the intestinal trunk. So intestinal trunk receives the lymph from the stomach and intestine, from the pancreas and spleen, and from the lower and front part of the liver, and empties lymph into the cisterna chyli, which in turn drains into the thoracic duct. And the third one is the bronchomediastinal trunk. So it drains lymph from the thoracic wall, lung, and heart. So the efferent vessels of the tracheobronchial lymph nodes ascend upon the trachea and unite with efferents of the internal mammary and anterior mediastinal glands to form the right and left bronchomediastinal trunks. And the right bronchomediastinal trunk may join the right lymphatic duct and the left thoracic duct. More frequently, they open independently of these ducts into the junction of the internal jugular and subclavian veins of their own sides. The fourth one is subclavian trunk. So this subclavian trunk drain the upper limbs. The efferent vessels of the subclavicular group unite to form the subclavian trunk, which opens either directly into the junction of the internal jugular and subclavian veins or into the jugular lymphatic trunk on the left side. It may end in the thoracic duct. And the last one is jugular trunk. Drain the head and neck. So it is formed by vessels that emerge from the superior deep cervical lymph nodes and unite to efferents of the inferior deep cervical lymph nodes. On the right side, this trunk ends in the junction of the internal jugular and subclavian veins, called the venous angle. On the left side of it joins the thoracic duct. So the lymph passage of the lymph trunks to the venous system differs on the right and left sides of the body. The three trunks on the right side will join to form a short right lymphatic duct that forms a single junction with the venous system. So these three trunks that will join together to form a short right lymphatic duct are the right jugular trunk, right subclavian trunk, and the right bronchomediastinal trunk. So in the left side also, it is you can find the largest lymph vessel. So the thoracic lymphatic duct, which forms the main duct for return of lymph to the blood. And cisterna chyli is a cavity or reservoir. This long duct, approximately 38 to 45 centimeter or 15 to 18 inches, begins as a dilation anterior to the second lumbar vertebra. And the lymph bronchomediastinal trunk joins the anterior surface of the subclavian vein independently and does not join the thoracic duct. Formation and flow of the lymph. The excess filtered fluid, about 3 liters per day, drains into lymphatic vessels and becomes lymph. Because most plasma proteins are too large to leave blood vessels, interstitial fluid contains only a small amount of protein. So there are two circulation, the systemic and pulmonary circulation. So as you can see here, the blood plasma is filtered from blood capillaries into interstitial spaces to become interstitial fluid. So after in the systemic blood capillaries, so it will go to lymphatic capillaries. So in this, it absorbs interstitial fluid and pass lymph to afferent lymphatic vessels. So afferent lymphatic vessels carry lymph from lymphatic capillaries to lymph nodes. So in these lymph nodes, it removes foreign substances through filtering lymph, phagocytosis, and immune reactions. So after this, it will go to the afferent lymphatic vessel, which carry lymph from lymph nodes. And in this valve, it ensures one-way flow of lymph. So after this, lymphatic vessels pass lymph to lymphatic ducts. And the lymphatic ducts empty lymph into the junction of the jugular and subclavian veins of the cardiovascular system. So this is a systemic circulation. and this is the pulmonary circulation. So, pulmonary circulation is ordered from the right ventricle to the pulmonary arteries through the lungs to the pulmonary veins and re-enters the heart in the left atrium. The real difference is that the systemic circulation carries the oxygenated blood from the body to the right atrium of the heart by the superior and inferior vena cava, while the pulmonary circulation carries oxygenated blood from the lungs to the left atrium of the heart by the pulmonary vein. So there are two pumps that aid the return of venous blood to the heart. So respiratory pump and skeletal muscle pump. The respiratory pump, it is a mechanism that helps to pump blood back to the heart during the inspiration. So ang example nga di kay during inhalation and exhalation. So during inhalation, when that diaphragm decreases, so it moves inferiorly and the abdominal cavity pressure will increase. And that pressure, it squeezes on this inferior vena cava that is within the abdominal cavity to push blood superiorly. So respiratory pump propel blood into the abdominal cavity superiorly during inhalation. And during exhalation naman, the blood within inferior vena cava that is superior to the diaphragm, and that blood is not on the right atrium where the blood needs to be returned to. So during exhalation nga, ang diaphragm is relaxed. So it pulled superiorly. And the volume of the thoracic duct decreases, and of course, the thoracic duct pressure increases. And that pressure is going to squeeze in the inferior vena cava, and it will move blood superiorly back to the right atrium. And the skeletal muscle pump, contraction of the skeletal muscle pump in the limbs, mainly the legs, that squeezes veins and decreases the volume of the veins that pushes blood superiorly up towards the heart. So in this skeletal muscle pump, an example nito is that when you are in a long flight, about 5 to 7 hours, you tend to stand up and walk back and forth because for you to activate your skeletal muscle pump, so you need to move your muscle and for your muscle to pump blood back to your heart. So there are also three factors that cause compression of the lymphatic vessels. And these are contraction of surrounding skeletal muscle during activity, periodic contraction of smooth muscle in the lymphatic vessel wall, and the pressure changes in the thorax during breathing. So this is the lymph formations. So fluid moves from blood capillaries into tissues and from tissues into lymphatic capillaries to form lymph. The overlap of epithelial cells of the lymphatic capillary allows fluid to enter easily but prevents it from moving back into the tissue. So the valves is located farther along in lymphatic vessels, also ensure one-way flow of the lymph. So there are two empty locations of the lymphatic vessels. So these are the right lymphatic duct and the thoracic duct. So lymphatic vessels from the right upper limb and the right half of the head, neck, and chest form the right lymphatic ducts, which empties into the right subclavian vein. And the lymphatic vessels from the rest of the body enters the thoracic duct, which empties into the left subclavian vein. So that's all for me. And the next reporter is Miss Pravida. Thank you.
I am Margie Provida, reporter about lymphatic organs and tissue. The lymphatic organs can be classified as primary and secondary. Primary lymphatic organs is a site where stem cells divide and become immunocompetent, that is capable of mounting an immune response. In a primary lymphatic organs such as red bone marrow and thymus, this is an occasion where lymphocytes are going to become incompetent, that is, they are then able to recognize and respond to antigens. Second primary lymphatic organ is thymus gland. The thymus is bilobed organ located in the mediastinum between the sternum and the aorta. It extends from the top of the sternum or the inferior cervical region to the level of the fourth costal cartilages, anterior to the top of the heart and its great vessels. The maturation of the thymus and other lymphoid tissue is stimulated by thymosin, a hormone selected by the epithelial cells that form the framework of the thymus gland. The evolution of the gland begins in adolescence, and with increasing age, the effectiveness of the T lymphocytes response to antigens declines. Thymus is another important lymphoid organ, unlike the lymph nodes and the spleen, which enable immune response by coordinating interaction between lymphocytes and antigens presenting cells. The thymus is a site of early T cell development. In humans, it is positioned right above the heart, and it is the biggest and the most active during infancy and childhood. T-cell progenitors migrate from the bone marrow to the thymus, where thymic sternal and epithelial cells guide their development. Like another lymphatic tissues, the thymus had distinct region which are called the cortex and the medulla, which correspond to different stage of T cell development. Less mature cell can be found in the cortex, and the more mature cell are in the medulla. Once fully developed, naive T cell leave the thymus and circulate through the bloodstream and lymph nodes. The function of thymus produced mature T lymphocytes that can distinguish self-tissue from foreign tissue, and also provide each T lymphocytes with the ability to react not only one specific antigen from the million it will encounter. The T lymphocytes that leave the thymus and enter the blood. Some enter into the lymphoid tissue and others circulate in the bloodstream. Now, let's talk about secondary lymphatic organs. Secondary lymphatic organs are the site where most immune response occur. All of our other lymphatic organs, they are considered to be secondary lymphatic organ. These competent cells will migrate these secondary lymphatic organs after maturation in the primary lymphatic organ. First is lymph nodes. The lymph nodes located along lymphatic vessels are around 60 oval or bean shape that scattered throughout the body, both superficial and deep, and usually occur in a group, a capsule of dense connective tissue that extend into the nodes. Each lymphatic node is surrounded by a protective layer of connective tissue called capsule. Lymph arrives on the nodes in afferring the lymphatic vessels and enters the sinuses, which are channel that allows lymph to flow throughout the different compartments of the nodes. The real power of lymph nodes is coordinating immune response come from their exquisite organization. Each lymph node has specific components from distinct cell types defined largely by chemokines, which allow the lymphocytes to effectively find their cognate antigens and interact with other cells in ways that will launch an immune response. Closest to the capsule is the outer text of the lymph node, or the B cell zone, which is made up of spherical structures called fossils that are full of B cells, as one might guess. As we move deeper into the node, we find the T cell zone, which is full of T cells, dendritic cells, which has been sampling bits of microbes of cellular debris throughout the body, migrate to the T cell zone and lymphoid node when they become activated. Next is the spleen. The spleen is oval in shape, which formed by a reticular and lymphatic tissue, and it is the largest lymphatic organ. Spleen is the largest lymphatic organ in the body with a dark reddish purple color. It sits right behind the stomach and has the main function. The first is to remove old red blood cells from circulation, which occurs in a region of the spleen called the red pulp. And the second to filter pathogens and immune complex from the blood, which occurs in the region called white pulp. White pulp is lymphatic tissue consisting most of the lymphocytes and macrophages arranged around branches of the splenic artery called central arteries. The red pulp consists of blood-filled venous sinuses and cord of splenic tissue called splenic cords. Function of spleen is phagocytosis. The old and abnormal erythrocytes are destroyed in the spleen and the breakdown product. Bilirubin and iron are passed to the liver by the splenic and portal veins. Second is storage of blood. The spleen consists up to 350 ml of blood, and in response to the sympathetic situation can rapidly return a large part of this volume to the circulation. Third is immune response. The spleen consists of T and B lymphocytes, which are activated by the presence of antigens. Fourth, erythropoiesis. The spleen and liver are important sets of fetal blood cell production, and this spleen can also fulfill this function in adults in times of great need. Next is lymphatic nodules. Are egg-shaped masses of lymphatic tissues that are not surrounded by capsule because they are scattered through the lamina connective tissue of mucous membrane lining the gastrointestinal, urinary, and reproductive tract and respiratory airways. Lymphatic nodules in this area, there are also referring of a mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue or mouth. The main group of mouths are the tonsils and pear patches. First, tonsil. Function to participate the immune response against inhaled or ingested foreign substance. Type of tonsils. First is pharyngeal tonsil. Adenoid is embedded in the posterior wall of nasopharynx. Next type is palatine tonsil. Lie at the posterior region of the oral cavity. Last is lingual tonsil, is located at the base of the tongue. Our tonsil are located our
types of immunity. First is innate non-specific immunity. Second is the adaptive immunity. Lastly, the acquired immunity. Innate non-specific immunity includes the external, physical, and chemical barriers provided by the skin and mucous membranes. It also includes the various internal defenses such as antimicrobial substances, natural killer cells, phagocytes, inflammation, and fever. Innate immunity physical barriers prevents pathogens and chemicals from entering the body in two ways, the skin and mucous membranes from barriers that prevent their entry. Chemical mediators are molecules responsible for many aspects of innate immunity. First is lysozyme. In tears and saliva, kill certain bacteria and mucus on the mucous membranes, prevents the entry of some pathogens. Histamine, complement prostaglandins, leukotrienes promote inflammation by causing vasodilation, increasing vascular permeability, and stimulating phagocytosis. Interferons protect cells against viral infections. Complement is a group of more than 20 proteins found in plasma. The operation of complement proteins is similar to that of clotting proteins. Normally, complement proteins circulate in the blood in an inactive form. Complement proteins can be activated by combining with foreign substances, such as parts of a bacterial cell, or by combining with antibodies. Interferons are proteins that protect the body against viral infections. When a virus infects a cell, the infected cell produces viral nucleic acids and proteins, which are assembled into a new viruses. The new viruses are then released to infect other cells. Because infected cells usually stop their normal functions or die during viral replication. Viral infections are clearly harmful to the body. Fortunately, viruses often stimulate infected cells to produce interferons, which do not protect the cells that produces them. Instead, interferons bind to the surface of neighboring cells, where they stimulate those cells to produce antiviral proteins. These antiviral proteins inhibit viral reproduction by preventing the production of new viral nucleic acids and proteins. Some interferons play a role in activating immune cells, such as macrophages and natural killer cells. Phagocytic cells. Phagocytosis is the ingestion and destruction of particles by cells called phagocytes. Particles can be microorganisms or their parts, foreign substances, or dead cells from the body. The most important phagocytes are neutrophils and macrophages, although other white blood cells also have limited phagocytic ability. Neutrophils are small phagocytic cells that are usually the first cell to enter infected tissues from the blood in large numbers. They release chemical signals that increase the inflammatory response by recruiting and activating other immune cells. Neutrophils often die after phagocytizing a single microorganism. Pus is an accumulation of fluid, dead neutrophils, and other cells at the site of infection. Macrophages are monocytes that leave the blood, enter tissues, and enlarge about 5-folds. Monocytes and macrophages form the mononuclear phagocytic system. Cells of inflammation, basophils, which are derived from red bone marrow, are motile white blood cells that can leave the blood and enter infected tissues. Mast cells, which are also derived from red bone marrow, are non-motile cells in connective tissue, especially near capillaries. Like macrophages, mast cells are located at the point where pathogens may enter the body, such as skin, lungs, gastrointestinal tract, and urogenital tract. Eosinophils also participate in inflammation associated with allergies and asthma. Inflammation is beneficial in the fight against pathogens, but too much inflammation can be harmful, destroying health tissues as well as the microorganisms. Natural killer cells, a type of lymphocyte produced in red bone marrow, account for up to 15% of lymphocytes. NK cells recognize classes of cells such as tumor cells or virus-infected cells in general rather than specific tumor cells or cells infected by a specific virus. For this reason, and because NK cells do not exhibit a memory response, they are classified as part of innate immunity. NK cells use a variety of methods to kill their target cells, including releasing chemicals that damage cells' membrane and cause the cells to lyse. Local inflammation is an inflammatory response confined to a specific area of the body. Symptoms of local inflammation include redness, heat, and swelling due to increased blood flow and increased vascular permeability, as well as pain caused by swelling and by chemical mediators acting on pain receptors. Systemic inflammation is an inflammatory response that is generally distributed throughout the body. In addition to the local symptoms at the sites of inflammation, three additional features can be present. Second, immunity is adaptive immunity. Adaptive immunity exhibits specificity and memory. Two groups of antigen. Foreign antigens are introduced from outside in the body, while self-antigens are molecules the body produces to stimulate an immune system response. Adaptive immunity divided into two. First is antibody-mediated immunity. Involves a group of lymphocytes called B cells and proteins called antibodies, which are found in the plasma. Antibodies are produced by plasma cells, which are derived from the B cells. So this is the structures of antibody. Second is the cell-mediated immunity. It's a function of cytotoxic T cells and is the most effective against microorganisms that live inside body cells. Viruses or some bacteria are examples of intracellular microorganisms. Cells of the immune response. B cells are lymphocytes found in the lymph nodes, spleen, and other lymphatic tissues where they replicate. Second is the plasma cells are formed by replicating B cells that enter tissues and produce huge numbers of the same antibody. Third is the helper T cells, are T cells that bind with specific antigens presented by macrophages. They stimulate the production of killer T cells and more B cells to fight the invading pathogens. Fourth is the killer T cells, kills virus-invaded body cells and cancerous body cells. Fifth is the suppressor T cells, slow down the activities of B cells and T cells once the infection is controlled. Sixth is the memory cells, are descendants of activated T cells and B cells produced during initial immune response. They will exist in the body for years, enabling it to respond quickly to infections by the same pathogens. Macrophages engulf and digest antigens. Cytotoxic, destructive to cells, T cells produce the effects of cell-mediated immunity. And lastly, acquired immunity. Active immunity results when an individual is exposed to an antigen, and the response of the individual's own immune system is the cause of immunity. Passive immunity occurs when other person or an animal develops immunity and the immunity is transferred to a non-immune individual. Natural and artificial refer to the method of exposure or antibody transfer. Natural implies that contact with the antigen or transfer of antibodies occurs when the part of everyday living and not deliberated. Artificial implies that deliberate introduction of an antigen or antibody into the body has occurred. There are four ways in acquired immunity: the active natural immunity, active artificial immunity, passive natural immunity, passive artificial immunity. Active natural immunity results from natural exposure to an antigen, such as a disease-causing microorganisms that stimulates the immune system to respond against the antigen. Because the individual is not immune during the first exposure, he or she usually develops the symptoms of the disease. Active artificial immunity. An antigen is deliberately introduced into an individual to stimulate the immune system. This process is called vaccination, and the introduced antigen is a vaccine. Passive natural immunity results when antibodies are transferred from a mother to her child across the placenta before birth. During her life, the mother has been exposed to many antigens, either naturally or artificially, and she has antibody against many of these antigens, which protect her and the developing fetus against disease. So this is the structure of acquired adaptive immunity. And will be the end of our reporting. Thank you.